What's up guys, Lifting here, back with another POELAB guide, this time together with two of the main men from POELAB.com, Suitsizesmall and POELAB himself are joining us. A few days ago I released a video on the very basics together with Paleo on how to get started with POELAB and things to be aware of, so check that out if you just need the very basics so you can get started. In this video we're gonna go a bit more into detail about what you can expect from farming POELAB, how to maximize your profit, deal with IZARO'S many different phases, and finally how to navigate the lab more efficiently by correctly reading the images provided by POELAB.com. Suit and POELAB, thank you for joining me. How are you guys doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
I'm doing great as well. Thanks for having me.
It's good to hear. So we're going to jump right into it, guys, because we have a lot of information we want to cover. And Suit, we're going to start with you. Why don't you go ahead and talk a bit about why even do POELAB? Why should people do it, and what can they expect from it?
Yeah, so the main reason to do POELAB is there's a high potential profit when running POELAB, despite that POELAB itself being a very difficult piece of content to learn and run, mostly because of the way there's the large layout, traps, and the incredibly dangerous IZARO fight. Very high rewards can result from this. Most notably, depending on your luck at least, a run of POELAB can net you a few chaos, and if you get really lucky, a couple exalts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the most reliable form of income typically comes from like quality skill gems, midnight fragments, divination cards, and then the occasional map treasure box. I personally find the quality gems to be the most reliable early on. However, later, once the market starts to saturate a bit, things such as enchant starts to play a big role. And can you explain why that is and how they use them, and how should people go about trying to enchant their items if they want to get some profit?
Yeah, so first off, for those who don't know what enchants are special modifiers you can craft an item via the enchantment shrine at the very end of the lab. Helmet enchants in specific tend to affect skills in certain ways. For example, a helmet enchant can give you 30% reduced earthquake duration or 12% flame blast radius. Now, for the sake of making currency, you shouldn't just enchant random helmets. One option is to enchant unique items. Uniques that get used a lot, for, like the Devotee's Devotion or Heretic's Veil, can sell for massive amounts of currency, upwards of 5 to 10 exalts. However, they do require a very, very specific set of enchants. For the more common ones, you would like to enchant item level 84 Hubris Circlets. Now, the main reason behind this is the base type is very popular due to the large amount of spellcasters, as well as energy shield builds that use them and rely on them. On top of that, the item level itself is very important because this allows for the helmet to be crafted with the best mods possible, and since the enchants are implicit, they cannot be removed and can't really be affected when crafting in the traditional way. Mm-hmm. And if you don't own any of these items to enchant, do not be afraid to buy them. The initial investment to buy one can easily double or triple the moment you sell the item with a proper enchant.
Yeah, getting those enchants is sure jackpot, so don't be afraid to spend a couple of KS to get a Hubris Circlet early on in the game. So we now know that there is profit to be made by opening these chests. However, these chests require keys, and your goal in the lab, if you're farming it for profit at least, is to get as many keys as you can per run. So how does one go about that, Suit? What do they need to be aware of to get those keys?
There are actually multiple ways to get treasure keys. Right now, one of the main ways is the mini-boss Argus. Argus himself is a tough mini-boss that is immune to all status ailments, as well as he has stun immunity. On top of that, he can actually enrage himself, and for a short period of time, he'll move faster, attack faster, and be able to deal a massive amount of damage. If you want a good way to find Argus, feel free to check out the lab notes on the POELAB.
So that's Argus. How about IZARO and his phases, Suit?
By default, IZARO himself will always drop one key. However, he cannot drop additional keys per phase you buff him, or allow the mechanics to fully charge up, for a total of 3 keys. However, to get the maximum keys, you will need to fully buff IZARO, which can result in a very, very difficult fight depending on which phases. Yeah. And on that subject, the phases that I personally do not recommend doing, these phases tend to add damage or defensive buff to IZARO. This can make him hit incredibly hard, and on top of that, it can make the fight itself last incredibly hard, making a 30-second fight possibly 2 minutes if things go really bad. So if you absolutely have to run these, I only recommend you run one of these phases. And these phases are the Charge Disruptors, Essence, Conduits, and Gargoyles. Now, on the flip side, the easy phases, Idols, Fonts, Lieutenants, portals. If these phases show up, you absolutely want to run these phases and try to get the buff, because it doesn't add that much to the IZARO fight, and it'll give you an extra key very easily. Lieutenant fight can be tricky due to the fact that in UberLab, IZARO has a lot of HP while his additional lieutenants do not. And if you accidentally kill one of the lieutenants, you'll lose a key, so you need to learn how to control that fight a little bit.
Sometimes killing him just incredibly fast is actually the method here, right? That's the go-to.
Yes, absolutely.
Then they don't get close to you and don't accidentally kill them.
However, you do have to be careful because there are actually 2 phases that you can't kill IZARO as quickly as possible. These phases are actually the Charge Disruptors phase and the Idle phases. These require time for the phase to actually activate. For example, Charge Disruptor, you need to let him charge up at least 10 to 15 of his Frenzy Charges or whatever they're called, and then you'll actually get the extra key. And for Idols, the golden statues will slowly stand up and then cast an Elemental Bomb. You need to let each statue cast first before you kill IZARO, or else you'll lose out on the key. For more information on how to deal with these phases, how to buff, debuff, there's a page as well as a video on the POELAB website that details these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's basically about getting IZARO buffed so he drops more keys, right? And the more buffed he is, the harder he is going to be. Some of these buffs, it's okay to skip them sometimes, right? Because maximum keys is of course nice, but if it means that you can't complete the lab, well, then it doesn't really work anyway, right?
Yeah, you can't make money if you're dead.
Exactly. We also know, Suit, that IZARO has 3 different weapon types. Could you tell us about them? What do people need to know here?
Yeah, so the 3 weapon types you can wield are a sword and a shield, dual swords, and a 2-handed mace. The main thing behind his weapon set is they tend to alter his damage and attack patterns a lot. It seems that the sword and shield phase is actually the lowest damaging phase, while the dual swords and 2-handed mace deals more damage than the sword and shield. Now, between those 2 phases, I personally haven't really found out which one deals more, mostly because a lot of my builds tend to be able to deal with the IZARO fight regardless of the weapons.
It's probably a good idea to say, though, that even though you have a tanky build and so forth, don't be too lazy. Like, try to move and avoid his attacks, because sometimes with the right combinations, he will probably be able to one-shot you. But they are telegraphed, they're pretty easy to see.
So despite the fact that he does have a multitude of weapons, as therefore damage variance and attack pattern difference, the level of danger of each weapon should be left up to you, the player, depending on how much you've done the lab and your skill.
Yeah, being successful in the lab is very much about having some experience too. You will probably fail quite a lot in the beginning, but that's okay. Don't get too frustrated if that's the case. There's also the silver doors in the lab. Why is it that people should potentially seek those out, Suit?
Yeah, so the first one I'll talk about would be the Intricate Locker. Now, the main appeal behind the Intricate Locker is that when you open it, the Intricate Locker itself has a tendency to drop a lab-specific, and net you the Uber Lab only drop, the Death's Door Crusader boots. These can sell for upwards of a few hundred chaos. In the Breach League, I managed to sell a pair for 190 chaos at some point. And alongside the Intricate Locker, there's the Curious Lockbox. The Curious Lockbox will always contain an extra treasure key, allowing you to open more boxes at the very end of the lab.
So when it comes to it, when you want to make some profit in the Uber Lab, it's really the amount of keys versus the amount of rooms you have to run and the time you have to spend. Basically, the idea, is it worth your time? What do you think? What should people look for? How many rooms? When does it start to suck?
Well, naturally, the tendency is to pick the least amount of rooms possible. I tend to count rooms minus the boss fights, so as a result, the shortest possible lab would be a 6-room lab. 2 rooms, boss fight, 2 rooms, boss fight. However, the lab can be longer. The longest I recall would be a 10-room lab, and that's something you don't want to shoot for.
Yeah, you just want to do something else that day then.
Yeah, map that day, just map.
Yeah.
Some of these objectives we talked about, for example, Argus and the Curious Lockboxes, can be located inside rooms. This can easily turn a 6-room run into an 8-room run, or even a 9-room run if Argus and the Silver Doors are inside rooms. This is when the player has to decide which objectives do they want to skip. Do they want to do a 9-run room with a bunch of keys, or do they just want to do the quick 6-run and just get 3 or 4 keys? Because maybe it's possible that running a faster lab and getting less keys can be more profitable because you can get more labs done in the shorter amount of time.
And to figure out like how the labs are looking that day, the boss fights, the weapons, the buffs, things like that, you can see that on POELAB.com. So make sure to check that before you do your Uber Labs that day. And so, Sud, we're going to recap this, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm just going to go here. Overlap can be tough in the beginning, and don't get too frustrated if you fail a couple of times. It's just a natural thing. You'll get better. It's a practice. Then we have regular chests provide the bulk of your currency gain, and if you get a good helmet enchant, that's your jackpot. To get the maximum amount of treasure keys, one have to locate and kill Argus, then defeat IZARO fully buffed from each phase, and if the layout allows it, by locating the extra silver chests throughout the labyrinth. That said, it is okay to skip an IZARO phase if that particular phase is too tough for your character. The labyrinth is not always worth your time. Make sure to check how many rooms, gold doors, and the specific buffs IZARO has that day, because, well, in this case, it really is time is money, and sometimes it just takes too much time to be efficient in the lab. Other days, it's incredibly profitable. And then, as I said, guys, to make this easier on yourself, go to the POELAB.com website where you can check out the daily lab layouts, boss information, and so forth. I think we have it here, Sud. Thank you very much. This is some really good info.
Yeah, no problem. Glad I could help.
Appreciate it. And we're going to continue on this tangent here. Guys, we have POELAB here too, as I introduced in the beginning. And POE, you're going to tell us, first of all, how to effectively read the layout images that you guys post on POELAB. And I'm going to pull up this image here. And if you just start telling us the very basics, what do we see here?
All right, so I'm going to break it down to the very, very basics. All right, I'm going to start with the boss weapon and the phases. We list what the weapons are, what he wields, whether it be the dual swords, the sword and shield, or the two-handed mace. We clearly label that on the far right side so you guys can kind of judge the difficulty of that. We also label the phases. There's 8 different phases that you can see on there. Also, the last one that we put on there, the number 3, is what you're going to see in the actual boss room, the traps and whatnot that surround IZARO, and that's really important to know. We also have a section for the additional notes where you'll see things like where Argus is, maybe a secret passage or a secret switch, maybe a dark shrine, whatever the runner finds.
And what do these secret passages do?
Sometimes the secret passages just go one room forward and they're really not worth it. Sometimes they go out of the way, they're not worth it. If you're really lucky, you'll find a secret passage that will skip a room and make your lab a little quicker.
So POE, for the actual layout, when we look at the image here, what does one need to focus on first, like the amount of rooms and the lines? What do all of this stuff indicate?
So these blue lines and the blue circles, a lot of people have a problem with this. They actually indicate where the exit to that room is. Whereas you can see on room 1, there's 2 blue dots, one being on the very top left, one being on the very top right, indicating that the top left is pointing to room number 2. You would go to the top left of that instance to get to room 2. And to get to room 3, you would go to top right. And that's why the main path indicates that it points to room number 3. A lot of people look at this and go, well, there's already lines pointing there. Why are y'all pointing these? Well, we're just trying to show you which exit goes to which room from that.
Yes, they basically tell you which door to go to get to the next room here.
Yes. Also, you can see Argus is generally labeled with a big yellow or a big orange A. If he's not on there, more than likely he's not there because he does have a chance to not spawn.
One of the other things I like about these layouts, it shows you where the gold doors are. If there are gold doors, you have to pass through, because those do require a gold key. You simply cannot pass through them if you don't have it. So if there's no gold doors that day, it saves you some time, but at least here you can see where to go to get the gold key and do it faster. So now that we have an understanding on how to read the images POELAB.com provides, I know you also want to share some general tips on how to navigate the labyrinth in praxis to be more efficient, time efficient.
All right, so I'm going to give you a couple of hints and tips of dealing with the door exits. Generally, your door exit's going to be either top left or top right. That's pretty much the whole lab, top left, top right. That's what you're looking for. And another small tip are the annexes and enclosures are always dead ends. So a couple of tips that you should know about the silver doors. They are optional. If you're just trying to get through the lab and get your ascendancy points, you do not have to worry about silver doors, silver keys. Just get in and get out. Don't worry about those guys. But when you're actually farming it, there's only a few things that could be worth your time. As Suit had mentioned before, intricate lockers and curious lock boxes are worth your time for farming. There's also a couple of other things that can help you generate a little bit of currency, especially when you're first starting out. Warmonger's caches and Emperor's treasuries tend to pay out some decent amount of currency, in my opinion.
So yeah, it
Also,
may pay for the Uber Lab entrance by itself by providing a bit of currency, but in general, it's not something you want to go for if you are an Uber Lab farmer and you want to be time efficient, right?
right. Like if you're just starting the league out and you're running in cruel or normal or merciless, those might be good to grab on your wave since you're just progressing your character. You're trying to get to Uber Lab and you're still trying to get currency.
Mm-hmm. Good tip, yeah.
Also, on the dark shrines, generally they're not worth your time. And as far as traps, you really need to be able to deal with bleeding. I always run, at least have one instant recovery. You have to. And when you're able to pop that when you get hit by spikes, grab a quick silver flask of adrenaline, get in and get out. Any kind of speed over the traps is really the best thing for you on dealing with them. Also, picking the right movement skill for your build with that one. There's actually 6 different movement skills, and everybody has their preference. I really think if I could give it a quote-unquote meta, it would be Leap Slam. Flame Dash is really good to have in a lot of situations, especially using it through just graded doors, the ones you have to click on to open to go to the next little room.
Yeah.
You can Flame Dash through those. The biggest tip I could give you about that is weapon swap. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, how does that work? What do people do? It's to increase the speed of Leap Slam, right?
Right.
The main setup would be to, in your main hand, hold a Bright Beak due to the fact that it is a very high local attack speed. Then in your offhand, you hold a 3 green Prismatic Eclipse. Now, the colors on that unique is very important because per green socket, you actually gain a global attack speed buff. Therefore, using this offhand Prismatic Eclipse for a global attack speed buff, combined with a Bright Beak, which has an insane base attack speed, you can get an incredibly fast movement skill.
It can almost be so fast that it's hard to keep up with. It saves you so much time. It's worth doing if you don't need your weapon swap for anything else.
Other than the flask that I just had mentioned, one of the life or death flasks is of warding. It helps you through some of the sentinels, and it really gets through the entire font phase. It makes the font phase kind of non-existent. Some other flasks that I do suggest, a Basalt Flask, the 20% fizz dam reduction. That is really important when we're dealing with IZARO because of his high amounts of fizz.
And it works for the traps too.
Yes.
And this kind of depends on the buffs he has sometimes, because sometimes he will have a lot of elemental damage, other times it will be physical. So you constantly have to figure out what is the best flask this time around. So don't be afraid to switch out your flasks, right?
Some of the things I could say to use, Stone Golem is really good. Vitality, you can have that if you're having problems with the traps. You can turn that on.
Yeah, exactly. Turn on Vitality while you're navigating through the labyrinth, and then turn on your other aura when you go up against IZARO.
You can also use a Rejuvenation Totem. So right there, just using Vitality, a Rejuvenation Totem, and a Stone Golem, those are all easy to turn on all at the same time.
All right, so if we recap here from what you said, PoE, learn how to read the images provided by POELAB.com to be efficient with your time. Memorize the names of the zones to know which ones to skip or engage in. Then dark shrines typically aren't worth pursuing, sometimes, but very rarely. Then the right type of flasks and curses can make the entire difference between success and failure. And finally, do not underestimate quality of life properties such as life regen, stone golem, etc. After all, you are designing an Uberlab character, not necessarily a mapper or a shaper killer. So make sure to focus on what makes it easy and fast to get through the Uberlab when creating a character. And once again, there are some build suggestions in the description of the video in case you are interested in checking them out. I think we covered it all now, guys. Awesome. This is a wealth of information, and hopefully this means that people will be able or be more inclined to try out Uberlab for profit farming. Personally, I love the lab, but it can be very, very frustrating. But it's really about preparing and having the right expectations before going in. And I'm hoping that with what you explained here, people will be a little better prepared. Suit and POE Lab, thank you very much for joining me and for providing POELab.com. It is an incredible source of information, and I use it almost every day. Thank you very much for joining, guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, and if you guys want to ask us any questions, for me personally, you can check me out over at twitch.tv/Suitsizesmall. I stream every day around 6 o'clock Central Time. That's the time Lab resets, time Master Reset. And I do the Uber Lab notes live every single day. And if you guys want to see what's Uber Lab as soon as possible, feel free to check me out there.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for watching. And bros, do you even nerd?